in 1995. The school was a place full of life, laughter, and dreams. For me, it was more than just a place to study, it was my refuge. At 16, I already had two passions that defined my life: soccer and music. I was part of the youth team at Independiente Medellín, and in my free time, I organized underground parties where I mixed music as a DJ. It was a time when everything seemed possible, when the future looked bright and full of opportunities. But everything changed the day I met Caliche. Carlos, or Caliche as everyone called him, was a quiet kid with an easy smile and a deep gaze. He was the sixth of 7 siblings, and though he came from a large family, he always seemed alone. I met him one day when he arrived at school on a bicycle, something uncommon at the time. From the start, there was something about him that caught my attention. He was reserved, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. He was an artist, a talented sketch artist who could spend hours creating worlds on paper. But he also carried a sadness that not many noticed. I remember that day after school, I approached him as he was putting away his bike. "Are you new?" I asked. He looked at me with a shy smile and nodded. "Yes, I just moved nearby," he said. We started talking, and though he was quiet at first, he gradually opened up. He told me he loved to draw and dreamed of becoming an artist someday. He also spoke about his family, but I noticed his voice drop every time he mentioned his father. "He's a strict man," he said, quickly changing the subject. From that day on, Caliche became part of our group. We were a handful of friends united by soccer, music, and a zest for life. We spent entire afternoons playing matches on the school field and then gathered in a park to talk about life. Caliche was always there, though sometimes he'd drift away without explanation. I remember once finding him sitting on the school bleachers, staring into the void. "Are you okay?" I asked. He just said, "Sometimes the world feels too heavy." I didn't fully understand what he meant, but his tone sent chills down my spine. One of the things that brought us together were the underground parties we organized. Caliche was always there, sketching in a corner while the music blared. It was incredible how he could concentrate amidst the chaos. Once I asked him why he didn't dance like the rest of us. He just smiled and said, "I prefer to observe. People are more interesting when they don't know they're being watched." It was at one of those parties that I first noticed something was wrong with Caliche. It was a warm night, and we had set up the sound system at a friend's house. The music was loud, and everyone was dancing and laughing, everyone except Caliche. I found him sitting in a corner with a notebook in his hands. "What are you drawing?" I asked. Without a word, he showed me the paper. It was a dark sketch, full of shadows and twisted figures. In the center was a figure hanging from a rope. I was silent, not knowing what to say. Caliche just smiled and said, "It's just a drawing. Don't worry." But that image stayed etched in my mind. Over time, I learned more about Caliche's life. He was the sixth of 7 siblings, and his family was complicated. His father was a strict man, a community leader in the Aranjuez neighborhood, respected by many but feared by others. His mother was a quiet woman who always seemed exhausted. Caliche's older siblings had achieved success by society's standards, stable jobs, families, but Caliche was different. He wasn't interested in following the same path. He wanted to be an artist, to live off his talent. But in a family where success was measured in economic terms, that wasn't enough. I remember once going to his house. It was a big place but felt cold. The walls were covered in family photos, but none of Caliche. He took me to his room, a small space filled with sketches. "This is where I hide," he said with a sad smile. He showed me some of his work, and I was impressed. He had incredible talent, but when I asked why he didn't show his drawings to his family, he just shrugged. "They wouldn't understand," he said. As time went on, the arguments at Caliche's house became more frequent. His father couldn't understand why he didn't get a real job. "What are you going to live on? Drawing?" he'd shout. Caliche tried to explain that art was his passion, but his father wouldn't listen. "You're lazy, useless," he'd say. Those words hit Caliche hard. One night, he came to my house crying. I'd never seen him like that. He was always the cheerful one, the one who made everyone laugh. But that night, he seemed broken. I tried to comfort him, but I didn't know what to say. I offered to let him stay at my house, but he refused. "I have to go back," he said. That was the last time I saw him cry. After that, he started distancing himself. He stopped coming to school as often, and when he did, he seemed lost in another world. The last day I saw Caliche at school was strange. He arrived early as usual, but this time he wasn't alone. He brought a new notebook and showed it to me with a smile. "This is my final project," he said. I opened it and saw a series of incredible drawings. That was the last time I saw him at school. After that, he stopped coming. They told us he was sick, but I knew it wasn't true. Something was wrong, but I didn't know what to do. Weeks turned into months, and little by little, we drifted apart. Life went on, and though I thought of him sometimes, I never took the time to look for him. Until December 2017. Caliche was a kid full of talent and kindness, but also pain. What's clear now is that Caliche wasn't just a friend. He was a brother. His story is a reminder that sometimes the people who smile the most are the ones suffering in silence. After that first encounter at school, Caliche became an essential part of my life. We were inseparable. Though I was more focused on soccer and he on art, we found ways to complement each other. He taught me to see the world differently, to appreciate the details that usually went unnoticed. I, in turn, encouraged him to step out of his comfort zone, to enjoy life without worrying so much about what others thought. The days on the school soccer field were some of the best. After class, we'd gather with the group to play endless matches. Caliche wasn't the best player, but he was always there, supporting us from the bench or sketching in his notebook while waiting for his turn. Once I asked him why he didn't try harder at soccer. He just smiled and said, "Not everyone is made for the same things. You have soccer, I have my drawings." That phrase made me think. Caliche was happy being who he was, and that was something I admired about him. But not everything was perfect. Sometimes during matches, I'd notice Caliche zoning out. His gaze would drift to the horizon as if he were somewhere else. When I asked what was wrong, he'd just say, "Nothing, just thinking." I never pressed him, but now I wonder if I should have. The underground parties we organized were always filled with his sketches. While the rest of us danced and laughed, he'd sit in a corner, capturing moments on paper. One night, after a particularly intense party, we stayed up talking until dawn. It was then that Caliche told me more about his family. "My father has never understood me," he said quietly. "He thinks art is a waste of time. He wants me to be like my brothers, stable jobs, families. But I don't want that. I want to be free." Those words stayed with me. Caliche didn't want to follow a predetermined path. He wanted to create his own. But in a family like his, that wasn't easy. The first serious conflict I remember happened during our last year of school. Caliche had decided to present a series of drawings at a local exhibition. It was his big chance to show his talent to the world, and he was excited. But when he told his father, the reaction was devastating. "An exhibition? What are you going to live on? Selling doodles?" his father shouted. Caliche tried to explain that it was his passion, but his father wouldn't listen. "You're lazy, useless," he said. That night, Caliche came to my house crying. I'd never seen him like that. He was always the cheerful one, the one who made everyone laugh. But that night he seemed broken. I tried to comfort him, but I didn't know what to say. I offered to let him stay at my house, but he refused. "I have to go back," he said. "I don't want them to think I'm a coward." That was the last time I saw him cry. After that, he started distancing himself. He stopped coming to school as often, and when he did, he seemed lost in another world. I remember one particular afternoon when I went to visit Caliche at his house. We'd agreed to work on a project together, but when I arrived, I was met with a scene I'll never forget. His father was in the yard, shouting at the top of his lungs. "You can't spend all day drawing. That won't put food on the table." Caliche tried to defend himself, but his voice trembled. "It's what makes me happy," he said, almost in a whisper. His father let out a bitter laugh. "Happy doesn't pay the bills, kid. You need to be like your brothers, real men." That night, Caliche came to my house with swollen eyes from crying. "They don't understand," he said. "They'll never understand." I tried to comfort him, but there was nothing to say. How could I help him face a family that didn't support him? I offered to let him stay at my house that night, but he refused. "I have to go back," he said. "I don't want them to think I'm a coward." After that argument, Caliche began to isolate himself. He stopped coming to school as often, and when he did, he seemed lost in another world. Sometimes I'd find him sitting on the bleachers, staring into the void. "Are you okay?" I'd ask, and he'd just nod. But I knew he wasn't. Something was consuming him from within. Despite everything, Caliche tried to reconcile with his family. On one occasion, he organized a small exhibition at home, inviting his parents and siblings to see his drawings. "I want them to see what I do," he told me. "Maybe then they'll understand." But his father's reaction was devastating. "This is what you do with your time?" he shouted. "Doodles? What are you going to live on?" Caliche tried to explain that art was his passion, but his father wouldn't listen. "You're lazy, useless," he said. That night, Caliche came to my house crying. "I don't know what else to do," he said. "Nothing I do is enough for them." I tried to comfort him, but I didn't know what to say. I offered to let him stay at my house that night, but he refused. "I have to go back," he said. "I don't want them to think I'm a coward." After that, Caliche disappeared from our lives. Weeks turned into months, and little by little, we drifted apart. Life went on, and though I thought of him sometimes, I never took the time to look for him. Until December 2017. In December 2017, I got a call from one of our old friends. "Caliche is back," he said. "He wants to see us." I couldn't believe it. After all this time, I was finally going to see my friend again. We met at a cafe downtown, and though I was excited, I also felt a strange sense of unease. When I arrived, I saw him sitting at a table with a cup of coffee in his hands. He looked thinner, more fragile, but his smile was the same. "It's been a long time," he said. We hugged, and for a moment, everything seemed normal. But then he started talking. "Things haven't been easy," Caliche told me. "My family doesn't understand me. They never have." He began to tell me about the constant arguments with his father, about how they called him lazy and useless. "They always compare me to my brothers," he said. "They have stable jobs, families, and all I have are my drawings." I tried to comfort him, but I didn't know what to say. "Maybe you should talk to them," I suggested. "Explain how you feel." Caliche just smiled sadly. "I've tried," he said, "but they don't want to listen. To them, art is just a hobby." During that meeting, Caliche showed me a new notebook. "This is my final project," he said. I opened it and saw a series of incredible drawings. They were portraits of all of us, his friends. There was one of me with a soccer ball in my hands, and another of our group at one of the parties. But what struck me the most was the last drawing. It was an image of himself hanging from a rope. I was silent, not knowing what to say. Caliche just smiled and said, "It's just art. Don't worry." After that meeting, I started noticing strange things in Caliche's behavior. On social media, he posted phrases like, "Sometimes silence is the loudest scream," or "Not everyone who smiles is happy." At first, I didn't pay much attention, but then I remembered the drawing he'd shown me. Was Caliche planning something? I tried to talk to him, but he always changed the subject. "I'm fine," he'd say. "Don't worry about me." But I knew he wasn't. Something was wrong, but I didn't know what to do. The last day I saw Caliche was December 14, 2017. He came to my house late at night with a serious expression on his face. "I need you to do something for me," he said. "If something happens to me, I want you to take care of my drawings." I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I nodded. "Of course," I said. "But why are you talking like this?" Caliche just smiled and hugged me. "Thank you," he said. "You're the best friend I've ever had." That was the last time I saw him. On December 14, 2017, the day that marked the beginning of the end, Caliche came to my house that night with an expression I'd never seen before. There was something in his gaze, a mix of determination and sadness that left me frozen. "I need you to do something for me," he said. "If something happens to me, I want you to take care of my drawings." His words echoed in my mind, but at that moment, I didn't understand their true meaning. That night, Caliche and I sat in my backyard. The air was heavy with a tension I couldn't explain. "What's wrong, Caliche?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He took a sip of coffee and looked at me intently. "My father and I had another argument," he said. It was worse than the others. He told me he'd rather see me dead than see me fail. His words left me breathless. He didn't mean it. I tried to comfort him. He was just angry. Caliche shook his head. He meant it, he replied. And maybe he's right. Maybe it's better this way. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Caliche stood up and hugged me. Thank you for everything, he said. You're the best friend I've ever had. Then he turned and left. That was the last time I saw him. After Caliche left, I couldn't sleep. Something about his behavior unsettled me. I checked his social media and saw he'd posted a phrase, "Sometimes silence is the loudest scream." I stared at the screen, not knowing what to do. Was Caliche planning something? Should I call someone? The next day, I tried to contact him, but he didn't answer. I called some of our friends, but no one knew where he was. The worry began to grow in my chest, but I didn't know what to do. On December 17, 2017, I received a call that changed everything. It was one of our old friends. Caliche killed himself, he said. The words hit me like a sledgehammer. I couldn't believe it. How could someone so full of life, so cheerful, make that decision? I went to his house, where his family and some friends had already gathered. The atmosphere was heavy, filled with tears and uncomfortable silences. His father was devastated, crying in a corner. I don't understand, he kept saying. Why did he do it? At the wake, we gathered, those of us who had once been an inseparable group. We talked about Caliche, about his smile, his talent, but also about his pain. Someone mentioned that in his last social media posts, he'd left hints about his mental state. Phrases like, "Sometimes silence is the loudest scream," or "Not everyone who smiles is happy," began to make sense. But what struck me the most was what happened next. 3 days after the wake, I started having strange dreams. And then I saw Caliche. It wasn't the cheerful Caliche I remembered, but a somber, anguished version. In the first dream, I saw him sitting in his room, sketching something in a notebook. I tried to get closer to see what it was, but every time I did, the image faded. In the second dream, I saw him arguing with his father. The fight was intense, full of shouting and reproaches. Caliche was crying, but his father wouldn't relent. "I'd rather see you dead than like this," he said. That phrase woke me up in a panic, my heart racing. The third dream was the most disturbing. I saw Caliche at his house, preparing something. He tied a rope to the patio fence, and though I tried to scream for him to stop, I couldn't do anything. I watched him climb onto a chair, adjust the rope around his neck, and then, I don't want to describe the rest. What struck me the most was his expression in that moment. It wasn't fear or sadness. It was regret, as if at the last second he had changed his mind. But it was already too late. December 17, 2017 was a day I'll never forget. It was his father's birthday, a man respected in the Aranjuez neighborhood for his leadership and strong character. As they did every year, the family had planned a celebration. But this time, everything would be different. Caliche had been acting strangely in the days leading up to it. And though some noticed, no one could have imagined what was about to happen. That morning, Caliche woke up early. From what his siblings told me, he seemed calm, almost resigned. He ate breakfast in silence, as he often did, and then locked himself in his room. No one thought much of it. Caliche had always been private. But this time, something was different. In his room, Caliche began to prepare. He took out a notebook and wrote a series of notes. Some were for his siblings, others for his friends, and one in particular for his father. In it, he wrote, "This is my final gift. I hope you understand." Then he put the notebook away and left the room. Throughout the day, Caliche said goodbye to his siblings. From what I was told, it was subtle, longer hugs than usual, telling them he loved them and asking them to take care of their mother. No one suspected anything. They thought it was just a gesture of affection. But looking back now, it was clear he was saying goodbye. One of my friends told me that Caliche called him that afternoon. "Do you remember that party where we met?" he asked. "It was one of the best days of my life." My friend didn't understand why he was bringing it up, but now he knows it was Caliche's way of saying goodbye. That night, the family got ready for the birthday celebration. Caliche stayed home, saying he didn't feel well. "Go without me," he told his siblings. "I'll stay here." No one insisted. They thought it was just one of his introverted moments. When the family returned home after the celebration, everything was dark. "Surprise!" they shouted as they walked in, expecting Caliche to have prepared something. But there was no response. Caliche's father turned on the lights and found him in the patio, hanging from a rope tied to the fence. The scene was devastating, a father finding his son dead on his own birthday. I can't imagine the pain. December 17, 2017, wasn't just the day of his father's birthday. It was the day Caliche decided to give his final gift. That night, while his family celebrated elsewhere, he was at home, preparing for what would be his last act. What happened in those final hours is something I'll never forget, especially after the dreams I had. According to the forensics, Caliche tried to save himself at the last moment. There were marks on his neck indicating he had struggled against the rope. Was it an impulsive act, or did he really want to teach his father a lesson? We'll never know for sure. But something tells me Caliche didn't want to die. He just wanted someone to listen. Caliche's suicide didn't just mark the end of a life. It left a deep wound in everyone who knew him. His death was a brutal reminder that sometimes the people who smile the most are the ones suffering in silence. And though time has passed, his absence is still palpable, a void that will never be filled. For his family, especially his father, Caliche's death was a crushing blow. Though he never admitted it openly, I know his father blames himself for what happened. The words he said that day, "I'd rather see you dead than like this," haunt him like a ghost. I've seen how his eyes cloud over whenever someone mentions Caliche, how he avoids talking about him, clinging to the idea that it was an accident, not a suicide. His siblings have also struggled with the pain. Some have found solace in religion, others in therapy. But they all carry a burden that can't be lifted. Why didn't we do more? Is a question that comes up often in their conversations. And though there's no clear answer, one thing is certain: Caliche's death changed them forever. For us, his friends, Caliche's death was a wake-up call. It made us realize we're not always there for those who need us most. Why didn't we see it coming? Is a question we constantly ask ourselves. And though there's no clear answer, one thing is certain: Caliche's death taught us to be more aware, to pay closer attention to the signs, and to never underestimate the power of a kind word. In the weeks after his death, we gathered several times to remember him. We talked about his drawings, his smile, his talent. But we also talked about his pain, the things we didn't see, the signs we ignored. It was a painful process, but a necessary one. And though we can't change the past, we can learn from it. The dreams I had after his death left me with more questions than answers. Were they just my mind trying to process the grief, or was it Caliche's way of communicating with me, of telling me he regretted it at the last moment? I'll never know for sure. But something tells me Caliche didn't want to die. He just wanted someone to listen. Those dreams made me reflect on the importance of communication, of being there for those who need us most. Sometimes a kind word or a supportive gesture can make the difference between life and death. And though we can't save everyone, we can try to be that light in the darkness for those around us. Despite everything, Caliche left a legacy. His drawings, once overlooked, are now appreciated by those who see them. Every stroke, every line, is a reminder of his talent, his passion, his soul. In his honor, we organized an exhibition of his work, and the response was overwhelming. People from all over came to see his drawings, to learn his story, to honor his memory. But beyond his art, Caliche left us with a lesson: the importance of empathy, understanding, and love. His death was a brutal reminder that sometimes the people who smile the most are the ones suffering in silence. And though we can't change the past, we can learn from it. We can be better. We can honor his memory by being that light in the darkness for those around us. This story isn't just about Caliche's death. It's about the choices we make and the consequences they have. Caliche was a bright young man, full of talent and kindness, but the world crushed him. His family, though they loved him, didn't see his pain. And we, his friends, were too busy with our own lives to notice something was wrong. Sometimes I think about what I could have done differently. What if I had called him more often? What if I had been there for him in his darkest moments? But it's too late now. All I can do is tell his story so others don't make the same mistakes. Caliche left us a gift, but not the one he had planned. He left us a lesson to value those we love, to listen to those who are suffering, and to never underestimate the power of our words. Because in the end, we all carry a burden, and sometimes that burden can be too heavy to bear alone.